So I thought it's time to give a bit of an update on how the last week or so has gone and share another set of random video clips that I've been taking. Wherever I've gone and whatever I've been doing, I've been making a point to take these short video clips and stitch them all together, just to pause and let the camera go for maybe 30 seconds or a minute or so, and then just add it together to use as a backdrop for some of my videos talking about life. And that'll be something we continue to do as I go forward. Sometimes it'll be a video game, sometimes it'll be just a video of everyday life or a place where I've been, and we can talk about that. In any case, it's been another week of getting things wrapped up and finishing up my final connections with people, letting folks know my new phone number as I prepare to make my move to Arkansas. Just being available if there's some random loose ends that maybe need to be tied up or something like that. But work-wise, it's been pretty quiet and pretty uneventful, and a pretty smooth transition from going to the office every day to getting up in the morning and not necessarily having anywhere to go at all. And it's been a little bit eye-opening to realize that people will seem like they're an important part of your day-to-day life just because maybe you work with them and you call them for business reasons often, but then they aren't necessarily going to be meaningful friends down the road if there's not a business reason to stay in touch. And I've thought about that as I've reached out to a few people and let them know kind of, I'm moving and my new number and stuff like that, and realized, like, if people aren't going to go out of their way to make an effort to communicate, or they're not going to go out of their way to come and visit or something like that, then, you just let them flow like water. It's not really my problem, right? And sometimes that could be a little bit passively disappointing. It's not because it's that big of a deal. It's just because you realize that people don't care, And then, of course, there are some people who do. And I don't want to say people don't care and then let that be grounds for an apparent pessimism or hatred of people in general, because there are excellent people out there who really are giving and caring, and the kind of people who will maybe show up that you didn't expect to show up, and the people who will make time for you. Like, for example, the video you were just seeing of the little stream and the hummingbirds there was actually from a visit over to a little spot out of town where a friend of mine retired, him and his wife, and went out there to visit them and wound up spending quite a few hours out there just relaxing and chatting and hanging out. And he's so gracious, so respectful, really doesn't think about himself, him and his wife both. And, they're the kind of people who are the right kind of people. And I know sometimes I don't necessarily spend a lot of time with them because maybe our interests are a little bit different. Our place in life is a little bit different. And so sometimes it can be hard to connect with people just because that whenever you do reach out to them, it's going to be an all day long commitment or something like that. But all of that being said, though, like, it's a great example, though, of, there's some people who don't reach out to you, and then there's other people who are going to be so generous with their time to want to be there to give you, counsel if you sought it, or to just listen, or to just enjoy your company for no reason other than the fact that they view it as a privilege to be able to spend time with a friend. And those are the kinds of people who deserve to be part of your life. Anyways, I've just been continuing to go for my normal walks around the neighborhood and enjoying the views of all those little things, like the torn up flag flapping at the Helena Community College campus that soon I will look at it for the last time, you know. And I even think about recent times when I've gone maybe for work or something to a city nearby, and you know, even at that time I didn't necessarily look around and think that's going to be the last time I see this place. But it is completely possible. You know, you reach the end of a time, end of a place, and then all of those everyday sights are pleasant to look back on because they are rare. They're abundant every day until they are rare because we never pass this way again. You know, I think about, you know, like this video here of the community college. I think about back when my wife was there and she was thinking about trying to go to school there, and we went in there to look around and ask some questions and things. And like, I do think about how when you live in a place for a while, especially as I've talked about it, you know, going through divorce and all those other life perspective changes, sometimes it's useful to walk away, find a new place, just because you can't see the same old streets and same old places without seeing the ghosts of the past. We were just looking at a video here of the old Nabisco factory. Actually, it's in my neighborhood. Used to be the Nabisco plant until it eventually wasn't anymore, and then the Nabisco factory turned into a mixed-use building that was abandoned for a while and then added on to for a while. And now I believe the Narcotics Anonymous meets in there along with some other random things, carpentry shop. There's the busy corner in town, the corner of Lindale and North Montana, where Helena Avenue intersects. And it's a kind of a weird sort of a five-way intersection there, and it sort of works, but it is probably one of the busiest intersections in the little town of Helena, Montana. I believe in that empty lot a new car wash will one day come, and the new food bank headquarters is actually right there as well. I was talking about volunteering for the food bank the other day, and this building here is actually their new building where they serve people. And it's an amazing place because it's like going to a grocery store, only it's a food bank. And they've really gone out of their way to make people feel valued as customers instead of being treated as charity cases or something like that. And I thought that was really amazing, and it could be a good thing to think about in terms of how do we make people feel? Because of that saying that I love, people will forget what you do, they'll forget what you say, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And it's so true. Like, you can do charity, you can do giving, but do you really make people feel valued? Or do you make them feel marginalized? And I think something like a food bank treating their clients as customers instead of as people that just, you know, are there because they have no other option, that can be a really humanizing thing when you're in a place where maybe you need that. There we have the dental office. It used to be something else, and then it got remodeled into a dentist office, which turned out to be pretty cool. It has been interesting to see how, you know, time has passed. Another week has gone by since I got the news that my job was going to be eliminated, and really put the ball rolling full force into moving away, really. I have had this 2 weeks to work on getting things squared away, and been doing stuff like updating the resume and applying for a few things, but mostly kind of waiting to get into Arkansas before I focus too heavily on applying for new jobs and worrying about that stuff. I think just getting moved into a new state is enough to focus on And I do want to just take the time to enjoy my experience here in town, to commit some of those things to memory that I may never see again. There we have the U-Haul place, which interestingly is going to be the U-Haul place I go to soon to get a truck and pack up all my stuff and move away. And then we're back over to the back side of the old Nabisco factory. You can see easily where the old was added onto on the building. And the back door where the Narcotics Anonymous meets. I think about things like AA and Narcotics Anonymous and stuff like that. And, you know, when you're not part of it, you think there's nothing special about it. But there's a guy in my apartment complex, and he has been clean and sober for years, and he still goes to AA. And he was talking about how it's kind of like going to church for him. It's a place where you can go and be free of judgment and just hang out with other people who have their own problems and have had their own problems. And there's an attitude of humility there. There's an attitude of fraternity there. And I was thinking about how, you know, you can have some guys of different backgrounds, broken spirits, so much different stuff, and just come together over a cup of coffee and talk about life in an environment which isn't going to be judgmental. And those sorts of things mean so much. There's just, you know, it's not, you know, you can't really work on helping others until you can be in a place of genuineness, authenticity, and humility. Then we come over a block, we got the Trump house. Guy always has his house decked out in red, white, and blue Christmas lights. And he's got a Jesus is my savior and Trump is my president flag, and then another flag of Donald Trump with his fist up in the air on the day he was shot in the ears. And, you know, it's one of those things really makes you think about how people that focus on ideology so much, they're going to be disappointed when the world moves on and everyone realizes Donald Trump is just a fad. But what happens if you've made your whole life that? Trying to antagonize people who are different than you and wave the flags of some guy, you know, cult of personality or whatever. All of that fades away, and it leaves people empty when they realize, you know, you spent years of your life freaking out about stuff and trying to paint your neighbors as being dramatically different than you or something like that. Whether you're on the left or the right, it's really pretty silly, all things considered. Here we have the neighborhood Catholic church, which I always like to walk around, and I've had the feeling that it's far enough from the apartment where I live that an evening walk does not count unless I manage to make it to this little church and walk around the little church. Then that is what constitutes a walk in my mind. Once I get to that little church, if I want to, I might go back home. But I will always go there and wander around in the grassy field there and walk around the probably empty parking lot. Kind of interesting how quickly things we make turn into things that start to decay. Parking lots develop cracks and grass starts growing in them. Popular places become forgotten places. We have the 1889 coffee house. It's kind of like a Starbucks, but it's its own unique thing. It's called 1889 because that's the year when the state of Montana was founded. So it was made in honor of that. But as the day turns to night, I like to go out when it's cool and quiet and just take in the lights of the city. A lot of places that just don't feel very special, but they do contribute to a certain vibe. It's kind of cool to be able to come out of your apartment and see all of the little casinos that tend to be a thing in Montana. Little restaurants where you can get Mexican food or McDonald's if you want to be unhealthy. And it's all right there, very close to where I've lived for the last nearly 5 years. I do look at the lights of things like casinos and bars and stuff, and sometimes I think about how it's kind of weird to be a person who doesn't drink and doesn't really do those sorts of things, to think about how you tend to be excluded from society in a lot of ways. Not entirely, but there's just so many things other people maybe would do that you don't, and so it does create barriers. There's that new building across the street where it used to be an old mall, and now there's a dialysis center there, so people can look up out the big picture window while they're getting dialysis done and see the view of the mountains in the distance. And that goes back to, it's meaningful to be able to do good for people who maybe aren't having a very good experience in life. Think about it. If you have to go get dialysis done, that pretty much sucks. But if you can go to a place where you get treated like a customer in a way, and it's pleasant and you have a nice view, well, maybe it's not quite as bad, Our local Taco Bell, Opportunity Bank of Montana training headquarters, and another Stockman Bank being built over there. Why? I don't know. It's interesting how Stockman Bank and a lot of the banks in Montana seem like they're always building another branch. You never really see anyone going in or out. Most of our things we do are online these days, so I'm not super sure why they need so many banks. I think sometimes it's because of the real estate value. Maybe it's good for them to own property because the property value will go up. So it's not just a place to serve customers, it's also an investment in properties which will appreciate in value. I think maybe it's something like that. I'm reminded of somebody who said mattress stores are a front for crime, money laundering, because if you think about it, you never see anyone ever coming out of a mattress store with a mattress. And of course, the reality is mattress stores usually deliver their mattresses to customers, so you won't see a customer dragging a mattress across the parking lot. But if you don't think too much about it, it does seem a little bit weird. Jimmy John's used to be Starbucks, Montana's first Starbucks, actually, and then Starbucks moved across the street. Back when we were still married, my now ex-wife used to work for Starbucks, actually, for a while. So I do have memories of spending time in that little building with her when it was Starbucks. And there's a Safeway store, open at least until 11 o'clock at night if somebody were to be in the mood to go for a walk, to go maybe get a soda or a bag of beef jerky or something. And it's just a couple blocks away from the Capitol, which is also a nice place to go walk. It's nice to be out at night because you can kind of walk around and cross streets and stuff a lot easier. It's also interesting how the busy road is actually technically a state route. The reason why it's a state route, freeway actually, rerouting through town, is because the Interstate 90 was supposed to go through Helena, Montana, because Helena is the capital city, but it didn't. Because at the time, the city to the south, which was Butte, Montana, had powerful people there, and they said, you know what, we want the freeway to go through our town instead of Helena, and so they used their power of pull to make that happen. And so as it turns out today, Helena, Montana, despite being the capital city, is a little bit off the beaten path. If you're traveling through on the interstate, you're not going to really see Helena, Montana, because it's a good hour or so north of the main east-west interstate. And the north-south axis is not really very heavily traversed because it's just connecting a few towns in northern Montana and the Canadian border. This here is the main high school for my side of town. Also a pretty peaceful place to go walk around in the grass or maybe sit on a bench when there's no students there. And finally back home, it is my very own apartment complex. The familiar dumpster, the uninspired design of apartments that probably were, I don't know when they were built. I would guess they were probably built in the 70s or the 80s or something like that. They've been around for a while. Nothing great about them, nothing really worth looking at, other than a lot of things wind up being interesting when they've become home for a while and you move on past them. One nice thing about Helena, Montana is that you will see deer everywhere. They're kind of like the neighborhood pets, just strolling around or sitting in a shady spot there looking at you while you make your way around. As we look at these videos, it was the next morning, actually, out on the west side of town, which is the part of town far enough away that I don't normally walk there from my apartment. So in this case, I was actually drove to the other side of town, just because it's not a very long distance, but it's far enough distance that you wind up not usually making it there unless you were to drive or bicycle. And there's not usually a whole lot of reason in my town to go to the west side of town, because most of the businesses and a lot of the restaurants and the things that you would be inclined to want to do tend to be on the more east side of town. And then you have downtown, and beyond that, more just kind of general neighborhoods and, you know, businesses that you're probably not going to go to all the time. Like maybe the Safe Light auto glass place or a t-shirt printing company or some kind of a thing that's sort of a, you know, not a huge attraction exactly. But it is a nice part of town, and so I kind of wanted to at least go for a stroll around there. I remember once me and my wife, when she was there, would go take our little black cat out. And I remember we spent a day walking that black cat around this neighborhood. Black cat did not really want to go for a walk, but it had no choice, so it had to go enjoy the outdoors on a leash. And I think we realized at that point that maybe the black cat was not intended to be walked like our dog, so black cat did not continue to be able to go for long walks around the neighborhood. But I always think about that, though, when I'm on that side of town. And there you have Lyndale Avenue, the long strode kind of road that expands through the uninteresting part of town, the Burger King, the four-wheeler store, a few car dealerships, and over there, just a little bit on the right-hand side of the frame, a little out of the frame, is probably the first gas station I ever stopped at when I moved into town. Of course, Mount Helena is visible from every angle in town. It's basically like the city's primary park, covered in trails and things that you can walk up. It's enough of a hike, it feels like you're in the wilderness and pretty much in the middle of town, so you don't have to leave town to do it. Definitely something I'd recommend to anyone in Helena, Montana. Of course, the gas station, like I was saying, the one that was my first stop in town, when Helena, Montana was a new experience and I was moving into town for the first time. We have a little game shop. Doesn't have a lot of things that I like in there, but it is a hobby shop, and it's about the only hobby shop that you'll find in town, so kind of feels like a special place just for that reason. And I do like to go in there and look around once in a while to see if there's anything that catches my eye. I've always been more of a computer gamer and not so much a tabletop gaming person, so the hobby shop is not exactly my cup of tea. There's Town and Country, the new store in town, which is all right. It's like a IGA basically. And Circle K gas station. That's where I once stopped with a friend of mine when we were bicycling to fill up the air in our tires. And once in a blue moon, I might make it in there for a cup of coffee if I'm around that part of town. I have always thought it's interesting how the flag of Montana is special and people really have a loyalty to the state in a special way. And I also thought it's interesting how Native American tribes in Montana have a sense of identity as a core part of the founding of the state and the history of the state in a way which is different than it was in Western Washington, where the Native Americans tended to be. You know, they ran huge, enormous mega casinos, but the culture of Native American life seemed a little bit more lost. Anyways, there we are, back home again for what will be home for just a few more days by the sketchy motel where people tend to do things that feel sketchy. Any case, that's it. Till next time. Thanks so much for watching.